Hello everyone. Today I'm back with a new Doctor Who Top 10, and it's the first one I've done in quite a long while, but there are going to be a lot more of these over this year in the run-up to Series 10 of Doctor Who, just because they're very fun, interesting videos to do, they always cause a lot of debate and discussion, and also just because the run I did last summer was so popular and successful. Now, with the recent news of Peter Capaldi's departure from Doctor Who, I thought I might as well kick off this new run of Top 10s with one on the subject of regeneration stories, because obviously the 12th Doctor is going to be getting his own farewell story at Christmas this year. Now, in a first for this series, I thought I might as well just quickly give a little set of criteria for what I would perceive as the perfect regeneration stories, in inverted commas, i.e. what I look for in a regeneration story, because that way my reasoning further on, when I'm ranking the actual stories themselves, will be clearer, hopefully to you as my viewer. So the first point I've got here is a good regeneration story should round off an era in a way that is both satisfying to the viewer and does the respective Doctor justice. I also think they should have a good plot. Now, to a certain extent, a regeneration story should, in my opinion, be slightly different to just any old episode. A Doctor's final showdown needs to be a situation that suits that particular Doctor, somewhere where the story arcs and series arcs have been heading for this Doctor, somewhere it makes sense for them to be at this point in their life, like a massive kind of season finale for a Doctor's era, if you like. There should be a sense of foreboding, not necessarily a prophecy, but I do like it when the Doctor is aware that he might be about to die, as it adds tension to the story. And finally, it needs to be centred around the regeneration. It's the most important scene of the story, and should be where everything is heading, not just a scene tacked onto the end for the sake of it. In light of this set of criteria, I've decided not to include Time in the Rani or the TV movie in this countdown, because the regenerations in those stories occur in the start of the subsequent Doctor's opener. Perhaps more controversially, you won't be finding The Night of the Doctor in this list. Whilst it is an outstanding minisode in its own right, it doesn't really round off an era in the same way that other regeneration stories in this list do, and are able to do, as there are so many different interpretations of McGann's Doctor's era across different mediums. It's easy enough to say so-and-so is canon, but even if we do count Big Finish and the BBC novels released over the 90s, it's still hard to come up with a concrete timeline for the 8th Doctor, and also, those stories don't all exactly lead up to his regeneration in The Night of the Doctor. Indeed, this minisode is more about setting up the War Doctor than ending the 8th, so effectively falls into the same category as Time in the Rani and the TV movie. So with that all out of the way, without further ado, here are the remaining 8 regeneration stories, ranked by me. In 8th place is the 10th Planet. The main reason I've ranked it at the bottom of the list is just because the regeneration scene at the end seems a bit tacked on to the end, as opposed to the plot all leading up to it. Of course, part of the problem is that it was tacked on to the end of Part 4, purely because William Hartnell's contract ran out with that story. I don't remember reading that the 10th Planet in particular was specifically picked out to be the first Doctor's last story for any reason. However, incidentally, the ideas surrounding cybernetics and the Cybermen do rather neatly tie into the theme of regeneration in the first place, particularly with the Doctor citing his first body as wearing a bit thin. With a little more forward planning and tightening up of these concepts, the 10th Planet could have been one of the great regeneration stories. As the first one of this format, it was never going to be perfect, and indeed, the production team at the time probably didn't even realise the significance that regeneration stories would go on to gain in the context of the canon. I mean, they weren't even sure that the show would continue with Troughton. But still, a huge credit to them in the first place for pulling off Regeneration number 1, and making it such a success and staple of the show's format. In 7th place, I've put Logopolis. It's a weird one, and I do actually find myself liking this story more and more every time I watch it. Even though it has some great potential to meet my criteria and be a fantastic regeneration story, however, it does fall short in some areas. For example, the final showdown between the Doctor and the Master is epic, but I would have appreciated some similarly meaty material earlier in the story. If you're going to bring back the Master for a Doctor's final story, try and make the most out of using him, by giving him as much interaction with the Doctor as possible. The concept of block transfer computation is an interesting one, although the actual realisation of the planet Logopolis is slightly disappointing, and its links to the Faris project tenuous, or at least hard to follow. Still, it's not a bad regeneration story by any means. I do love the inclusion of the Watcher, and the sense of mystery and intrigue brought about by his constant presence. In 6th place, it's Planet of the Spiders. Although I've always found the plot of this one slightly dodgy, and the whole idea of spiders being amplified by an alien crystal a little ridiculous, there's also a lot to like about the Third Doctor's final adventure. One of my favourite things about this story is how the writers attempted to portray the downfall of a Doctor, with the character's instincts and morals being challenged and explored properly for the first time. To what extent this is fully successful in what it sets out to achieve is debatable, but credit to them for trying. The themes of Buddhism also feel very relevant, and the consoling presence of the Doctor's old mentor helps to both add a sense of finality and reassure the audience, through Sarah Jane, that the Doctor will make it out alive. However, in the back of my mind, I can't help but think that the final game would have been an even more fitting end for the Third Doctor, and it is such a shame that we never got to see him face the Master one last time instead, due to Roger Delgado's unfortunate and untimely death. In 5th place we have The War Games. My only real major complaint about this one is its length. Yes, I know it helps to make it feel like a real epic, and I suppose the effect would have worked even better with the story spread across 10 weeks, counting down to the Second Doctor's demise, as it was originally broadcast. It's a little slow to begin with, but some really intriguing new concepts are explored and introduced to the canon, namely in the form of the Time Lords towards the end of the adventure. Watching the story initially, I knew the Doctor's exile to Earth was coming, but still found the gradual realisation that he has no other option than to return to Gallifrey hugely thrilling. If the beginning suffers from being a bit slow, the end is perfectly paced, with the whole of Part 10 devoted to the Second Doctor's trial and gradual downfall. It's outstanding television and a fitting end for his Doctor. Furthermore, with 10 weeks' worth of content to play with, the writers had clearly carefully planned the demise of the Second Doctor, making for an even more exciting and enriching viewing experience. In 4th place, I've placed The Time of the Doctor. Now on first watch, I really wasn't a massive fan of this story. However, the ingenuity of the 11th Doctor's last adventure becomes more apparent to me every time I rewatch it. Obviously Moffat didn't have the whole of 11's timeline filled in from the start. However, there were clearly fixed events in his own mind, enabling him to roughly plan out his era. As a consequence of this, watching elements of previous stories finally get paid off in The Time of the Doctor creates gripping television. All I would say is the story suffers from being too short to pay everything off in a way that is fully satisfying, and is a little self-indulgent at times, notably with the Doctor randomly appearing naked towards the start. There's also not a lot of plot, although it does actually work brilliantly in the grand scheme of things. Overall, a near perfect way to round off a fantastic Doctor's era. In 3rd place, it's The Caves of Androzani. Generally, I do find the 5th Doctor's swan song pretty overrated. However, as a way to round off his era, I can see why it works extremely well, and it's easily the strongest classic series Regeneration story. From the start, there is an unnerving sense of impending doom, which really comes to a head at the climax of Part 4, when the Doctor is forced to find Peri a life-saving antidote, only to then discover that there's not enough for him to use as well. We are presented with one of the show's finest villains in the form of Sharaz Jek, who the viewer finds both very repulsive, but also can strangely relate to and sympathise with at times. The whole piece feels very claustrophobic and tense, making it a fitting choice for the 5th Doctor's final story. In 2nd place, I've gone for Bad Wolf and the Parting of the Ways. Fans have often cited Series 1 as one of the best of revived Doctor Who, if not the best, because of how carefully structured the episodes were, to create an immensely satisfying overall story. Although it is a shame that Christopher Eccleston chose not to continue with the 2nd series, the fact that he made his decision to leave so promptly clearly enabled Russell T Davies to effectively plan out a whole Doctor's era in just one series, with the start, end and middle all laid out in front of him, so I think he did have considerably more control over where the 9th Doctor's era was going than some previous Doctors whose eras were spread over 3 series or more. Bad Wolf and the Parting of the Ways draw together many elements from 9's previous 10 episodes, such as the return of the Daleks in Satellite 5, and a clever link back to Father's Day, with Jackie choosing to help Rose save the Doctor because it's what her late husband would have done. With such a strong plot in its own right, as well as all these links, it's no real surprise that the 9th Doctor's farewell stands out to me as one of the most successful season finales and Regeneration stories. And here it is, my favourite Regeneration story of all time is The End of Time. Now yes, it's not perfect, don't get me wrong. As I possibly implied in my criteria at the very start of the video, I don't actually think the show has had its best Regeneration story yet, But then that's because with the amount of forward planning involved to make them so successful, I can imagine that it's so difficult to create the perfect farewell for a Doctor. However, in my opinion, the end of time comes pretty close, and I will always remember it fondly and nostalgically as my first Regeneration story. Being spread across 2 feature-length parts really helps to let this story breathe a bit more than previous Swan songs, allowing plenty of time for payoffs and plot twists. Bringing back the Master was a fantastic choice for the 10th Doctor, and better still was a decision to resurrect the Time Lords and Gallifrey. Some say the Doctor's farewell tour at the end of the episode is a little self-indulgent, which I will grant you it is, but it does round off his era and the RTD era really nicely. All these elements make the end of time feel like a really special piece of television. I will say that the plot is a little dodgy in some places, and at times is a tad slow, but overall, this is an outstanding episode of Doctor Who, and the best finale the 10th Doctor could have hoped for. So thank you very much for watching this top 10, or top 8. I really hope you enjoyed it, and please let me know what you think of my choices in the comments below, and do comment your own rankings of the Regeneration stories we've had so far. Do stick around, as I will be back for more top 10s over the coming weeks, and if you're new to my channel, please do hit that subscribe button. Thanks again for watching this video, it means a lot to me, and I'll see you then. Bye for now, guys.